The black Mercedes Maybach glided silently through the cracked asphalt streets of East Cleveland, its tinted windows reflecting the harsh reality of abandoned storefronts and weathered buildings. Inside, Jonathan Bradley III adjusted his platinum cufflinks and checked his Patek Philippe watch with the same mechanical precision he applied to every aspect of his life. At 34, he had inherited one of America's largest tech empires, built on algorithms that connected billions of people worldwide, yet he remained emotionally disconnected from everyone around him. This visit to the impoverished neighborhood was nothing more than a quarterly inspection, a corporate obligation to verify that the Bradley Foundation's community programs were functioning according to budget projections. Jonathan rarely involved himself personally in these matters, preferring to delegate such tasks to his extensive team of executives and social coordinators. However, recent board pressure had forced him to make these appearances, to show his face and demonstrate the family's commitment to social responsibility. The Mercedes stopped in front of a community center that bore the Bradley Foundation logo on a modest bronze plaque. Jonathan stepped out, his handmade Italian shoes touching the cracked sidewalk for the first time in years. The contrast was stark. His navy blue Tom Ford suit stood out like a beacon among the faded colors of urban decay. Children played with makeshift toys in small yards enclosed by chain-link fences, their laughter echoing off the brick walls of apartment buildings that had seen better decades. He walked with purpose, flanked by two security guards who maintained a respectful distance. The foundation's local coordinator, a nervous middle-aged woman named Patricia, hurried alongside him, rattling off statistics about job training programs, after-school initiatives, and food distribution centers. Jonathan nodded at appropriate intervals, his responses measured and professional, his mind already calculating the return on investment of each program. The tour proceeded as expected, a brief stop at the computer lab where teenagers learned basic coding skills, their visit to the small medical clinic that provided free health screenings, and a walk through the renovated kitchen where volunteers prepared daily meals for families in need. Jonathan maintained his composed demeanor, shaking hands with staff, members and offering polite congratulations on their work. This was familiar territory, controlled environments where his presence was anticipated and orchestrated. But as they rounded the corner of Miller Street, something shifted in the carefully choreographed routine. Patricia had excused herself to take an urgent phone call, and the security guards had momentarily stepped back to give him space to observe a new urban garden project. For the first time during the visit, Jonathan found himself alone, truly alone in this neighborhood he had funded but never truly seen. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows between the buildings, and the air carried the mixed scents of exhaust, fumes, cooking spices, and something else. The earthy smell of rain-dampened cardboard and metal. It was then that his eyes were drawn to a figure hunched over near a collection of recycling bins behind a small grocery store. A woman knelt among scattered aluminum cans and plastic bottles, methodically sorting materials into different containers. Her movements were deliberate and dignified, despite the humble nature of her task. She wore a faded denim jacket over a simple white t-shirt, both clean but showing signs of repeated washing and wear. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and even from a distance, Jonathan could see the unmistakable curve of her pregnant belly. Something about her posture, the graceful way she moved despite her condition, made him take a step closer. And then she looked up. The world seemed to stop. Those eyes, deep brown, expressive, intelligent, belonged to someone he had tried desperately to forget. Sarah Martinez, the woman who had once been the center of his universe, the one person who had seen past his wealth and status to touch something real inside him. The woman he had banished from his life in a moment of rage and betrayal, without giving her a chance to explain, without listening to her side of the story. Sarah's hands stilled on the recycling materials. For a moment that felt like an eternity, they simply stared at each other across the divide of 3 years and a lifetime of regret. Jonathan's throat went dry, his usual composure cracking like ice under sudden heat. He wanted to speak, to run to her, to demand explanations and offer apologies in the same breath. But his feet remained rooted to the spot. Sarah slowly stood up, one hand instinctively moving to support her lower back, the other smoothing down her jacket in a gesture that was both protective and proud. She didn't look away, didn't show surprise or anger or any of the emotions Jonathan might have expected. Instead, her expression remained calm, almost serene, as if she had been expecting this moment all along. "Hello, Jonathan," she said simply, her voice carrying the same warm timbre he remembered, though now it held a weight that hadn't been there before. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. How do you speak to someone you loved completely and then destroyed? How do you bridge a chasm you created with your own hands? Jonathan Bradley III, who commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, found himself utterly speechless in the presence of a pregnant woman sorting recyclables behind a corner store. Sarah picked up her collection bag and slung it over her shoulder with practiced ease. She looked at him once more, and in that look Jonathan saw everything. The love they had shared, the pain he had caused, the life she had been forced to build without him. But he also saw strength, a resilience that took his breath away. "I need to get these to the recycling center before it closes," she said matter-of-factly. "The evening shift pays better." She began to walk away, and panic seized Jonathan's chest. He couldn't let her disappear again, not like this, not when fate had brought them face to face in the most unlikely of circumstances. "Sarah, wait," he called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Please." She paused, but didn't turn around. "What do you want, Jonathan?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with 3 years of silence and separation. What did he want? To apologize, to explain, to demand to know whose child she was carrying? The possibilities swirled in his mind, but none of them felt adequate for this moment. "I want to talk," he said finally. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." Sarah turned slowly, and now he could see the full impact of their separation written on her face. She was still beautiful, perhaps more beautiful than before, but there was a hardness there, a wall built from necessity and self-preservation. "You had your chance to talk 3 years ago," she said quietly. "You chose not to take it." The words hit him like physical blows. He remembered that night, the photos his mother had shown him, the damning evidence that had seemed so convincing at the time. Sarah's supposed betrayal with his business rival, the secret meetings, the intimate dinners captured by private investigators. He had been so certain, so righteous in his anger. "I was wrong," he whispered, the admission tearing out of him like a confession. "Sarah, I was so wrong about everything." For the first time, her composure wavered slightly. A flicker of something, pain maybe or surprise, crossed her features, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Wrong about what, Jonathan?" she asked, and there was a challenge in her voice now. "Wrong about not trusting me? Wrong about believing I would betray you? Or wrong about throwing me out of your life without even listening to what I had to say?" Each question was a blade to his heart. Jonathan realized that his security guards and Patricia were probably looking for him by now, but he couldn't bring himself to care. This conversation, this moment, was more important than any corporate obligation. "All of it," he said desperately. "I was wrong about all of it. The evidence, the photos, everything was fabricated. I found out the truth, Sarah. I know what my family did to us." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, the mask of composure slipped entirely. But then she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, and Jonathan was reminded of just how strong she had always been, even when he had been too blind to see it. "And what exactly did you find out?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tremor he could detect underneath. Before Jonathan could answer, Patricia's voice called out from behind him. "Mr. Bradley? Sir, we really need to get back to the center. Your mother has been trying to reach you." The mention of his mother sent a chill down Jonathan's spine. Catherine Bradley, the iron-willed matriarch of the family empire, had orchestrated Sarah's removal from his life with surgical precision, and now she was calling, probably wondering where her son had disappeared to during what should have been a routine charity visit. Sarah followed his gaze to Patricia and the security guards who had appeared at the corner of the building. Understanding dawned in her eyes, the recognition that this was still his world, one of schedules and obligations and people who managed his time like a precious commodity. "Go," she said simply. "Your real life is calling." "This is my real life," Jonathan said urgently, gesturing between them. "This moment, right here, is more real than anything I've experienced in 3 years." Sarah smiled sadly, and it broke his heart all over again. "No, Jonathan, it's not. Your real life is board meetings and charity galas and making decisions that affect thousands of people. My real life is making sure I can afford groceries and finding ways to earn enough money to provide for my child." The word "my" cut through him like a knife. Not our child, but my child. The possessive pronoun created a distance between them that felt insurmountable. "Sarah, please," he began, but she was already walking away again. "Mr. Bradley," Patricia called again, more insistently this time. Jonathan looked between Sarah's retreating figure and his waiting staff, torn between two worlds that seemed impossible to reconcile. But as Sarah reached the corner of the building, she stopped and looked back at him one last time. "If you really want to talk," she said, "you know where to find me now." And then she was gone, disappearing around the corner with her bag of recyclables, leaving Jonathan standing in the middle of a cracked sidewalk with his heart pounding and his carefully ordered world tilting on its axis. The Bradley mansion in Shaker Heights felt more like a mausoleum than a home, as Jonathan paced the marble floors of his private study. 3 days had passed since his encounter with Sarah, and he hadn't been able to focus on anything else. Every board meeting, every phone call, every decision that crossed his desk seemed meaningless compared to the weight of that moment behind the grocery store. He had tried to find her again, driving through East Cleveland in his Mercedes, searching the streets and recycling centers. But Sarah Martinez had vanished as completely as she had 3 years ago, leaving him with nothing but questions and the growing certainty that he had destroyed the best thing in his life based on lies. The study door opened without a knock, a liberty only one person in the house dared to take. Catherine Bradley glided into the room with the regal bearing that had made her a formidable presence in Cleveland's social circles for decades. At 62, she remained strikingly elegant, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her St. John suit immaculate despite the late hour. "You missed dinner again," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk with practiced grace. "Mrs. Henderson is concerned about your appetite." Jonathan barely glanced up from the private investigator's report he'd been reading for the 100th time. The document contained everything: bank records, surveillance photos, testimony, from witnesses who had been paid to lie. The elaborate conspiracy his mother and brother had constructed to destroy his relationship with Sarah was laid out in black and white, each piece of fabricated evidence meticulously documented. "I'm not hungry," he replied tersely. Catherine's sharp blue eyes missed nothing, including the scattered papers on his desk. She leaned forward slightly, and Jonathan saw the exact moment she recognized the letterhead from the investigative firm. "What are you reading, darling?" Her voice maintained its cultured tone, but Jonathan detected the slight tension underneath. "The truth," he said simply, finally looking up to meet her gaze. "Something I should have sought 3 years ago." A flicker of something, fear perhaps or calculation, passed across Catherine's features, but her expression remained composed. "I'm afraid I don't understand." Jonathan stood up slowly, his hands braced on the desk. "Don't you? Because according to this report, you understand perfectly. You and Marcus orchestrated every single piece of evidence that convinced me Sarah was cheating on me." The silence that followed was deafening. Catherine didn't deny it immediately, which told Jonathan everything he needed to know. Instead, she straightened in her chair and regarded him with the cool assessment of a chess master whose gambit had been discovered. "And what if we did?" she asked finally, her mask of maternal concern dropping away to reveal the steel underneath. "That woman was destroying you, Jonathan. She was beneath you in every way that mattered." "Beneath me?" Jonathan's voice rose despite his efforts to remain calm. Sarah has more integrity in her little finger than this entire family has combined. Catherine stood as well, her own composure beginning to crack. She was a secretary, Jonathan. To ask nobody from a nobody family who saw an opportunity to climb the social ladder. Do you think she loved you for who you are, or for what you could give her? She loved me for who I was when I was with her, Jonathan shot back. Someone real. Someone who didn't measure every relationship by net worth and social standing. How romantic, Catherine said acidly. And where has all that authenticity gotten her? From what I hear, she's collecting aluminum cans to survive. Is that the life you want? Is that the legacy you want to leave? Jonathan felt rage building. In his chest, a hot, consuming anger unlike anything he'd ever directed at his mother before. What I want is the chance to make things right. What I want is to be worthy of the woman I threw away because I believed your lies. My lies? Catherine's voice turned shrill. Everything we showed you was based on truth. She was meeting with Richard Hammond. She was accepting his gifts. Business meetings. Jonathan slammed his hand on the desk. Sarah was trying to start her own non-profit organization. Hammond was her potential investor. Every dinner, every meeting, every photograph you twisted into something sordid was completely innocent. Catherine waved her hand dismissively. Details. The point is, she was going behind your back, making plans without consulting you. That's not the behavior of a devoted partner. It's the behavior of an independent woman who was trying to build something meaningful with her life. Something that didn't revolve around the Bradley name or the Bradley money. And look where it got her, Catherine said with cruel satisfaction. Pregnant and alone, digging through garbage for spare change. If she had stayed with you, she would have been provided for. Protected. Jonathan went very still. What did you just say? For the first time, Catherine seemed to realize she had revealed too much. A flush crept up her neck, but she held her ground. I said she made her choice. No, you said she was pregnant. How do you know that? The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Catherine's jaw tightened, and Jonathan saw the exact moment she decided to abandon all pretense. Because I make it my business to know about threats to this family, she said coldly. I've had people keeping an eye on her since she left, making sure she doesn't try to come back and make claims against the Bradley fortune. Claims? Jonathan's voice was deadly quiet. What kind of claims? Catherine lifted her chin defiantly. The kind that could cost us millions in settlements or, God forbid, legitimize a bastard heir who could challenge Marcus's position in the company. The words hit Jonathan like a physical blow. You think the baby is mine? I know it is, Catherine replied without hesitation. The timeline matches perfectly. She was pregnant when she left, though she probably didn't know it yet, and now she's about to give birth to a Bradley heir who was conceived outside the bounds of proper marriage. Jonathan sank back into his chair, the weight of the revelation crushing down on him. Sarah was carrying his child, had been carrying his child for months, and he had left her to face pregnancy and poverty alone because he had believed his family's fabricated evidence. You've been watching her, he said, the pieces clicking into place. You know where she lives. Catherine's expression became wary. Jonathan, whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking, he interrupted, that I've let my family manipulate me for the last time. I'm thinking that I have a responsibility to Sarah and to my child that supersedes any loyalty to people who would destroy innocent lives to protect their precious reputation. Your child? Catherine laughed harshly. You don't even know for certain it's yours. That woman could have been with anyone after she left here. Jonathan stood up again, and this time there was something in his posture that made Catherine take a step back. No, he said quietly. Sarah isn't like that. She never was. And the fact that you would suggest otherwise just proves how little you understand about the kind of person she is. The kind of person she is, Catherine repeated mockingly, is exactly the kind who would use a pregnancy to try to worm her way back into your life and your bank account. Then why hasn't she contacted me? Jonathan demanded. If she's as calculating as you claim, why hasn't she shown up demanding support? Why is she collecting recyclables instead of calling lawyers? The question seemed to catch Catherine off guard. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, apparently realizing that her conspiracy theories didn't hold up under scrutiny. Because, Jonathan continued, Sarah has more pride and integrity than anyone in this house. She would rather struggle alone than ask for help from someone who discarded her like garbage. Catherine's face hardened. Fine. Let's say you're right about her character. Let's say she's this paragon of virtue you seem to think she is. What then? Are you planning to throw away everything your grandfather built, everything your father preserved, for some romantic notion of true love? I'm planning, Jonathan said steadily, to do what I should have done 3 years ago. I'm going to find Sarah, apologize for believing your lies and ask her to forgive me. And if she doesn't, if she's moved on with her life, Jonathan met his mother's gaze with unwavering determination. Then I'll respect her decision. But I won't let another day pass without her knowing the truth about what happened to us. Catherine stared at him for a long moment, and Jonathan could see her calculating, trying to find an angle that would dissuade him from his course. Finally, she seemed to reach a decision. If you do this, she said slowly, if you pursue this fantasy, you'll be walking away from everything. The board will never accept her. The shareholders will revolt. Your brother will use your instability as grounds to have you removed from leadership. Let them try, Jonathan replied. I'd rather lose everything and have a chance at real happiness than keep living this hollow existence you've created for me. Catherine's composure finally cracked completely. You ungrateful boy, she hissed. Everything we did for you. To protect you. To ensure your future. No, Jonathan said sadly. Everything you did for yourselves, to maintain control, to preserve your vision of what the Bradley legacy should look like. But you never asked what I wanted. You never considered that maybe, just maybe, I might be capable of choosing my own path. With that, he walked past his mother toward the door. Catherine's voice followed him, sharp with desperation. Jonathan, if you leave this house tonight, to chase after that woman, don't expect to be welcomed back with open arms. He paused at the threshold, his hand on the doorknob. Mother, he said without turning around, I stopped expecting anything from this family the day you convinced me to throw away the only real love I've ever known. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Catherine Bradley alone in the study, with the investigator's report scattered across the desk, evidence of the elaborate deception that had finally come to light 3 years too late. Jonathan found Sarah's apartment building after 3 days of methodical searching through East Cleveland's rental records and utility databases. The 2-story brick structure on Woodland Avenue had seen better decades, with peeling paint around the windows and a front porch that sagged under the weight of too many winters. Unit 2B was accessible through a narrow staircase that creaked, with each step the sound echoing through walls thin enough to hear conversations from neighboring apartments. He stood outside her door for several minutes, his hand raised to knock, paralyzed by the magnitude of what he was about to do. How do you apologize for 3 years of absence? How do you explain that you've discovered the truth too late to prevent irreparable damage? The investigator's report was folded in his jacket pocket, concrete proof of his family's manipulation, but somehow the evidence felt inadequate compared to the enormity of his failure. Finally, he knocked, 3 soft raps that seemed to echo through the entire building. Just a minute, Sarah's voice called from inside, and the familiar sound of it made his heart race. He heard footsteps, slow and careful, and then the door opened just wide enough for her to see him through the security chain. Her dark eyes widened slightly when she recognized him, but she didn't remove the chain. What are you doing here? Jonathan. I need to tell you something, he said simply, about why I believed what I believed about what really happened to us. Sarah studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her weighing her options. Finally, she closed the door and he heard the chain sliding back. When she opened it again, she stepped aside to let him enter. The apartment was smaller than his walk-in closet back in Shaker Heights, but it was clean and organized with a dignity that made the space feel larger than its dimensions suggested. A small sofa faced a coffee table made from stacked milk crates and a piece of wood. Books lined makeshift shelves constructed from boards and bricks. In the corner, a bassinet waited with folded baby clothes stacked neatly beside it. Sarah moved carefully to the sofa, her pregnancy now clearly in its final weeks. She wore a simple sundress that she had obviously altered to accommodate her changing shape, and her hair was pulled back in the same practical ponytail he remembered. But there was something different about her now, a strength and self-possession that made her even more beautiful than before. "Sit," she said, gesturing to the opposite end of the sofa. "But I should warn you that my upstairs neighbor plays his music loud after 10 o'clock, and the family next door has a baby who cries through the night. This isn't the kind of quiet you're used to." Jonathan sat down carefully, acutely aware of how out of place he looked in his tailored suit. "I don't care about the noise," he said. "Sarah, I came here because I found out the truth. About the photos, about the meetings with Hammond, about everything." He pulled out the investigator's report and placed it on the makeshift coffee table between them. Sarah glanced at it but didn't reach for it. "What truth?" she asked quietly. Jonathan took a deep breath and began to tell her everything. His mother's confession, the elaborate conspiracy, the paid witnesses and fabricated evidence. He spoke for 20 minutes without interruption, laying out the full scope of his family's deception, while Sarah listened in complete silence. When he finished, the apartment was quiet, except for the distant sound of television from another unit and the hum of an old refrigerator in the kitchen. Sarah picked up the report and flipped through it slowly, her expression unreadable. "So," she said finally, "your mother and brother decided I wasn't good enough for the Bradley heir, and they manufactured evidence to convince you I was cheating." "Yes. And you believed them without ever asking me for my side of the story." Jonathan felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Yes." Sarah set the report back down and looked at him directly. "Why?" The simple question cut deeper than any accusation could have. "Because," Jonathan said quietly, "I was a coward. Because it was easier to believe you had betrayed me than to believe my own family would manipulate me so completely. And because," Sarah continued, "somewhere deep down you thought maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't good enough for you." Jonathan wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in his throat. Because there was truth in what she said, a small poisonous part of him that had always wondered if someone like Sarah could really love someone like him for reasons that had nothing to do with money or status. "I was wrong," he whispered. "About everything. And I'm so sorry, Sarah. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." Sarah was quiet for a long time, her hands resting on her belly. Finally, she spoke. "Do you know what the hardest part was?" she asked. "It wasn't losing the comfortable life or the security. It wasn't even having to start over with nothing. The hardest part was losing my faith in my own judgment. For months I questioned everything I thought I knew about us, about you, about myself." Jonathan felt tears threatening, but he forced himself to listen. "I kept thinking there must have been signs I missed," Sarah continued. "Some indication that you didn't really trust me, that you were looking for a reason to end things. Because if you could believe so easily that I would betray you, then maybe our relationship wasn't what I thought it was." "It was everything," Jonathan said desperately. "What we had was real, Sarah. It was the only real thing in my life." "Then why was it so easy to destroy?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Jonathan realized that apologizing wasn't enough, that understanding the truth wasn't enough. Sarah needed him to confront the deeper issue of why he had been so willing to believe his family's lies in the first place. "Because I was taught from birth that people like you, people who didn't grow up with money and privilege, were fundamentally different from people like me," he said slowly. "I was programmed to believe that love couldn't cross those boundaries, that it was naive to think someone could want me for myself rather than what I could provide." Sarah's expression softened slightly. "And now I know that the only person who ever loved me for who I really am is sitting 3 feet away from me. And I threw that away because I was too damaged by my upbringing to recognize real love when I had it." Sarah looked down at her hands, and Jonathan saw her struggling with something. When she looked up again, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The baby is yours," she said simply. "I know you're wondering, so I'm telling you. But I want you to understand something, Jonathan. I didn't keep this pregnancy hoping you would come back. I didn't avoid contacting you because I was playing hard to get. I made a choice to raise this child without you because I believed you had made your choice clear." Jonathan felt his world shift on its axis. He was going to be a father. He was going to have a child with the woman he loved, and he had almost missed it entirely because of his family's manipulation. "When?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Any day now," Sarah replied. "Maybe tonight, maybe next week. Babies come when they're ready." Jonathan looked around the small apartment. At the bassinet in the corner, the carefully organized baby clothes, the stack of pregnancy books on the makeshift bookshelf. Sarah had prepared for this alone, had made every decision and faced every fear without him. "What can I do?" he asked. "How can I help? How can I make this right?" Sarah studied his face for a long moment. "You can't make it right, Jonathan. 3 years is a long time. I'm not the same person who loved you so completely that she planned her entire future around you. I've learned to survive on my own, to make decisions without considering anyone else's needs, to protect myself from disappointment. But you're willing to let me try." Sarah was quiet for so long that Jonathan thought she might ask him to leave. Finally, she spoke. "If you want to be part of this child's life," she said slowly, "you'll have to prove that you're capable of choosing us over your family's expectations, not just now, in this moment of guilt and revelation, but consistently, every day, even when it's difficult." "I'll do anything," Jonathan said immediately. Sarah shook her head. "Don't make promises you might not be able to keep. Instead, start small. Show me you can live without the comfort and privilege you've always known. Show me you can make sacrifices for something other than a corporate bottom line." Jonathan felt a flutter of panic. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Sarah said, standing up slowly, "that if you want to be part of this baby's life, you need to understand what that life is going to look like. Not from the perspective of someone who can write checks to solve problems, but from the perspective of someone who has to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries." She walked to the window and looked out at the street below, where children played on sidewalks cracked by tree roots and time. "There's an apartment available downstairs," she said without turning around. "One bedroom, no air conditioning, thin walls and a heater that works about half the time. The rent is $400 a month, which includes utilities if you don't use too much electricity." Jonathan joined her at the window, trying to process what she was suggesting. "Move in downstairs," Sarah continued. "Get a job that pays by the hour instead of by the year. Learn what it means to worry about money, to make do with less, to find joy in simple things. Do that for 6 months and maybe we can talk about what comes next." Jonathan looked out at the street, at the reality of the life Sarah was offering him, and felt something like vertigo. Everything in his upbringing rebelled against the idea of voluntary poverty, of choosing hardship when comfort was available. But then he looked at Sarah, at the proud set of her shoulders and the gentle curve of her belly where his child was, growing, and he realized that she wasn't asking him to live in poverty. She was asking him to live in truth, to discover who he really was when all the external trappings were stripped away. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll do it." Sarah turned to look at him, searching his face for signs of uncertainty or reservation. "It won't be easy, Jonathan. You've never had to worry about basic necessities. You've never had to choose between comfort and principle." "Then, it's time I learned," he replied. "Time I proved to myself and to you that I'm capable of being the man this child deserves as a father." Sarah nodded slowly, and for the first time since he had found her again, Jonathan saw something that might have been hope flickering in her eyes. 6 weeks into his new life in apartment 1B, Jonathan Bradley had learned that pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. His hands, once soft from a lifetime of desk work and manicures, were now calloused from his job at Murphy's Construction, where he worked 10-hour days installing drywall and learning the satisfaction of building something with his own labor. The paycheck barely covered his rent and basic expenses, leaving him to choose between buying name-brand groceries or having enough left over for laundry at the corner laundromat. Every morning, he woke to the sound of Sarah moving around upstairs. The creak of floorboards, the rush of water through old pipes, the gentle hum of her voice as she talked to their unborn child. Sometimes in the evenings, he would leave small folded notes under her door. Apologies written on the back of utility bills, observations about his day, promises to be better than he had been. Sarah never responded to the notes directly, but he knew she read them because sometimes he would find his spelling corrected in red ink or a small comment written in the margin. It was a fragile form of communication, but it felt more honest than any conversation they had shared during their previous relationship. On a humid Thursday in late August, Jonathan came home from work, covered in drywall dust, to find Sarah sitting on the front porch, breathing heavily and timing something on her phone. "The contractions are 8 minutes apart," she said without preamble. "I called Dr. Peterson, and she said to come in when they're 5 minutes apart, or if my water breaks." Jonathan dropped his tool bag and sat down beside her, careful not to touch her without permission. "How long have you been having them?" "Since about noon," Sarah replied, wincing slightly as another contraction began. "I probably should have mentioned it sooner, but I thought they might stop." "Should I call someone? Get the car? Take you to the hospital right now?" Sarah managed a small smile despite the pain. "That's very sweet, but you don't have a car anymore, remember, and we'll take the bus to the hospital when it's time." Jonathan had forgotten. Selling his Mercedes had been one of his first acts of financial necessity, the proceeds going toward establishing a small emergency fund that Sarah had insisted he maintain. Public transportation had become his primary means of getting around the city, a humbling experience that had taught him patience and planning. "Then I'll call a taxi," he said, "or an ambulance if we need to." "Jonathan," Sarah said gently, placing her hand over his. It was the first time she had voluntarily touched him since he'd moved downstairs. "I've been preparing for this moment for months. I have a bag packed, I know the route to the hospital, and I have money saved for the taxi fare. I don't need you to panic on my behalf." He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had learned to navigate pregnancy and impending motherhood entirely on her own. There was a competence and self-reliance about her that both impressed and humbled him. "What do you need me to do?" he asked. Sarah considered the question seriously. "You can sit with me while I time the contractions. And when it's time to go to the hospital, you can come with me if you want to." "Of course I want to," Jonathan said immediately, "if you'll let me." They sat together on the porch as the sun began to set over East Cleveland, timing contractions, and watching neighbors return from work. Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street waved and called out good wishes in Spanish. The teenage boys who lived next door offered to carry Sarah's hospital bag when the time came. It was a community that Jonathan had never experienced in Shaker Heights, where privacy was prized above connection. At 9:30, Sarah's water broke. The taxi ride to Metro Health Medical Center was a blur of traffic lights and hurried breathing exercises. Sarah remained remarkably calm, coaching herself through each contraction, while Jonathan held her hand and tried not to let his own anxiety show. The driver, a middle-aged man named Hassan, kept glancing in the rearview mirror and offering encouragement, in a heavily accented voice. "My wife, she had 4 babies, Hassan said as they pulled up to the emergency entrance. "Each one different, but all of them miracles. You're going to be fine, Mama." The next 12 hours tested every assumption Jonathan had ever held about his own strength and endurance. Sarah's labor was long and difficult, with complications that required constant monitoring and occasional medical interventions. Jonathan remained by her side through all of it, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and learning that there was no experience more humbling than watching someone you love bring new life into the world. At 6:47 a.m., their daughter was born. Emma Rose Bradley Martinez entered the world with a robust cry that filled the delivery room with joy and relief. She had Sarah's dark eyes and what appeared to be Jonathan's stubborn chin, and when the doctor placed her on Sarah's chest, Jonathan felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of what mattered in life. "She's perfect," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at their daughter for the first time. Jonathan couldn't speak. He could only stare at this tiny person who carried half his DNA and all his hopes for the future, and feel the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a mantle he prayed he would be worthy of wearing. "Would you like to cut the cord?" Dr. Peterson asked him. With hands that trembled slightly, Jonathan performed his first act as Emma's father, severing the physical connection that had sustained her in the womb and welcoming her into the larger world they would now navigate together. Later, as Sarah slept and Emma rested in the hospital nursery, Jonathan called his mother from a payphone in the hospital corridor. "Hello, Mother," he said, when Catherine answered on the second ring. "Jonathan!" Catherine's voice was sharp with surprise, and something that might have been relief. "Where are you? I've been trying to reach you for weeks." "I'm at Metro Health Hospital," Jonathan said calmly. "Your granddaughter was born this morning." The silence that followed stretched so long that Jonathan wondered if the connection had been lost. "Granddaughter?" Catherine finally managed. "Emma Rose," Jonathan said. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She's healthy and beautiful, and she's going to grow up knowing that her father chose love over fear. "Jonathan, please," Catherine began, but he interrupted. "Her? I'm calling to let you know that I'm resigning from all positions in Bradley Industries, effective immediately. Marcus can run the company however he sees fit. I'm starting a non-profit organization focused on providing support services for single mothers and low-income families." "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious," Jonathan replied. "Sarah and I are going to raise our daughter in East Cleveland, at least for now. We're going to show her that family is about more than money and social position. And if you ever want to meet your granddaughter, you'll need to accept that this is who we are now." Catherine's voice turned cold. "If you think that woman is going to welcome me into your new bohemian fantasy, you're more deluded than I thought. Sarah has more grace and forgiveness in her little finger than most people have in their entire bodies," Jonathan said. "If you approach her with genuine respect and humility, she might surprise you. But if you come with judgment and condescension, she'll protect our daughter from that toxicity, and I'll support her completely." He hung up before Catherine could respond, feeling lighter than he had in years. When he returned to Sarah's room, she was awake and holding Emma, who was trying to focus her brand new eyes on her mother's face. "How did she respond?" Sarah asked, because she had overheard enough of his phone conversations to know he had been planning to call his family. "About as well as expected," Jonathan replied, sitting down in the chair beside her bed. "But I made it clear that our life is here now with you and Emma, and anyone who wants to be part of that life will have to accept our choices." Sarah looked at him carefully. "Are you sure about this, Jonathan? Really sure? Because once we register Emma's birth certificate, with both our names on it, once we start building a life together, it becomes much harder to change your mind." Jonathan reached out and gently touched Emma's tiny hand, marveling at how perfectly her fingers were formed, how her grip instinctively tightened around his finger. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," he said. "For the first time, I know who I am when everything else is stripped away. I'm Emma's father. I'm someone who loves you more than his own comfort, and I'm a man who chooses authenticity over convenience." Sarah smiled, the first completely unguarded smile he had seen from her since their reunion. "Then I think we can figure out how to do this together." 3 months later, the Bradley Foundation for Family Support held its first fundraising event in the community center, where Jonathan had first encountered Sarah again. The irony wasn't lost on either of them, that the space which had witnessed the beginning of their separation was now hosting the celebration of their new beginning. Local news crews covered the story of the tech heir who had given up his fortune to work alongside the woman he loved, building programs to support families in East Cleveland. The national media picked up the story, turning Jonathan and Sarah into unlikely symbols of redemption and second chances. But none of the external attention mattered as much as the quiet moments in their shared apartment. Emma's first smile, Sarah's gentle corrections of Jonathan's diaper-changing technique, the way their small family had learned to find joy in simple pleasures like Sunday morning pancakes and evening walks through their neighborhood. On Emma's first Christmas, as Jonathan watched Sarah teach their daughter to clap her hands to the rhythm of a lullaby, he realized that wealth had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love, freely given and gratefully received. "Do you ever regret it, Sarah?" asked him one evening as they sat on their front porch, Emma sleeping peacefully between them in her carrier. "Regret what?" "Giving up the life you were born to live." Jonathan looked out at the street, where children played under streetlights and neighbors called greetings to each other across front yards, and then looked back at Sarah and Emma, his real family, his chosen family, his redemption made manifest. "No," he said simply. "I regret the years I wasted living someone else's idea of what my life should be. But this, us, here, now, this is the life I was meant to live." Sarah reached over and took his hand, their fingers intertwining as naturally, as if the 3 years of separation had never happened. "I love you," she said quietly. "Not the man you were, not the man you thought you had to be, but the man you chose to become." "I love you too," Jonathan replied, "and I promise that every day for the rest of our lives, I'll keep choosing to be worthy of that love." Above them, the Cleveland sky was clear and full of stars, each one a point of light in the darkness, each one a reminder that sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. And in that moment, with his family beside him and his future stretching out like an open road, Jonathan Bradley understood that he had finally found his way home. Film de Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Jonathan and Sarah's story has moved you as much as it moved us. Their journey reminds us that true love isn't about perfection. It's about the courage to admit our mistakes and the strength to rebuild from the ground up. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't what we inherit, but what we choose to create with our own hands and hearts. If this story touched your heart, we have an entire collection of equally captivating tales waiting for you. You'll find our special playlist by clicking to your left: stories of redemption, second chances, and the power of choosing love over fear. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Jonathan and Sarah's journey resonated with you. Every day, we bring you unique stories that explore the beautiful complexity of human relationships and the transformative power of forgiveness. We can't wait to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between comfort and authenticity? Do you believe people can truly change when love is on the line? Share your own stories of second chances. We read every single comment and love connecting with our community. Until next